I have been sitting on a judge's bench for more decades than I care to admit. And if there is one thing I have learned about human nature, it is this. Stupidity is not a crime, but it should be painful. People walk into my courtroom every single day under the delusion that they are the first person on God's green earth to invent a lie. They think because they speak quickly or because they use big words, they clearly don't understand that I am somehow going to be dazzled into buying their brand of baloney. Let me tell you something right now. I don't do dazzled, and I certainly don't do stupid. When you step through those double doors, you are not entering a debate club. You are not on a talk show. You are entering a court of law, my court of law, and the rules are not suggestions. They are the absolute baseline of civilized behavior. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of dreary, overcast day that usually brings out the chronic complainers. Bird, my bailiff, who has the patience of a saint and the eyes of a hawk, was already at his station. The gallery was full of the usual suspects, people whispering, clutching crumpled receipts, mentally rehearsing the tragic monologues they thought were going to win me over. I was in my chambers, reviewing the case file for the next matter. Arthur Pendleton suing Marcus Thorne for $5,000. Unpaid rent, property damage, and a breach of quiet enjoyment. The paperwork was a mess. A landlord trying to squeeze blood from a stone, and a tenant who apparently believed that paying rent was an optional monthly subscription that he could cancel whenever the mood struck him. The buzzer sounded. It was time. I gathered my robes, grabbed the file, and walked out. "All rise!" Bird's voice boomed through the room, a familiar, commanding rumble that instantly sucked the idle chatter out of the air. Everyone in the gallery stood up. The plaintiff, Mr. Pendleton, an older man wearing a cheap suit that looked like it had been ironed with a brick, practically leaped to his feet. He had the nervous, exhausted energy of a man who had spent the last 6 months losing sleep over his bank account. And then there was the defendant, Mr. Marcus Thorne. I took my seat at the bench, arranged my glasses, and looked down. Pendleton was standing at the plaintiff's podium, his hands trembling slightly as he held his manila folder. At the defendant's podium, Marcus Thorne was seated. Let me paint you a picture of Mr. Thorne. He looked to be in his late 20s, dressed in a faded graphic t-shirt that said something profound about vibes, ripped jeans that cost more than a sensible person's car payment, and a pair of dark sunglasses. Indoors, in a courtroom, he was slouched in his chair, his legs stretched out and crossed at the ankles, chewing a piece of gum with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a cow working its cud. I stared at him. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He just kept chewing, staring back at me through those ridiculous dark lenses. The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Bird shifted his weight, his hand resting casually near his belt, his eyes fixed on Thorne. The audience in the gallery stopped breathing. They knew. Everybody who watches me knows that there is a storm brewing when I get very, very quiet. I didn't yell. Yelling is for people who have lost control, and I never lose control. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood of the bench, and peered over the rim of my glasses. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice dangerously low, slicing through the heavy silence of the room, "is there a medical reason you are currently glued to that chair?" Thorne stopped chewing for a fraction of a second, gave a little scoff, and leaned further back. "Nah, I'm good," he said. His voice was dripping with that specific brand of unearned arrogance that makes my blood pressure spike. "I just prefer to sit." "You prefer to sit," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air so everyone could appreciate the sheer magnitude of his idiocy. "Yeah," he said, popping a bubble. "I don't really do the whole bowing down to the system thing. It's a free country, right? I'm comfortable here." I felt a cold, sharp focus settle over me. It is a rare and beautiful thing when someone hands you the rope they intend to hang themselves with before the trial has even officially begun. "Let me explain something to you, sir, and I am only going to explain it once," I said, tapping my pen rhythmically on the manila folder. "You are not at a coffee shop. You are not lounging in your mother's basement playing video games. You are in a court of law. When the officer of the court says, all rise, that is not a polite request. It is a directive. It means you stand up to show respect, not for me personally, but for the institution of justice that is about to hear your case. So I'm going to give you exactly 3 seconds to get on your feet, take those absurd sunglasses off your face, and spit that gum into a piece of paper, or your next preferred seating arrangement will be in a holding cell. I watched his face. I could see the gears turning behind the sunglasses. He was a classic bully, a big fish in whatever tiny, insignificant pond he crawled out of, used to intimidating weak-willed landlords like Mr. Pendleton. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought I was a pushover. Look, Judge, Thorne started, waving a hand dismissively. I know my rights. You can't force me to stand if it violates my personal autonomy. I read about this online. It's a First Amendment issue. Forced compliance is practically— Stop right there, I snapped, bringing my hand down flat on the bench with a sharp smack. Do not quote internet law to me. You do not know your rights. You don't even know your lefts. You are a profoundly misinformed young man who has confused watching a 3-minute video on social media with a law degree. Mr. Pendleton, the plaintiff, looked like he was about to faint. He was gripping his podium so tightly his knuckles were white, terrified that this blatant disrespect was somehow going to ruin his chances of getting his money back. Bird, I said, not taking my eyes off the defendant. Yes, Your Honor, Bird replied, taking one heavy step toward the defendant's podium. Mr. Thorne seems to be suffering from a fundamental misunderstanding of where he is, I said, my voice hardening into a block of ice. I want him to stand up, now. Bird stepped right up to the partition. He didn't have to say a word. He just stood there, all 6 foot plus of him, a mountain of quiet authority in a crisp uniform. You could see the exact moment the realization hit Mr. Thorne that the internet was not coming to save him. The smirk faltered, the jaw stopped chewing, but his ego, that massive, fragile balloon of unwarranted self-importance, just wouldn't let him back down. He crossed his arms over his chest, gripping his own biceps like he was bracing for an earthquake. You can't do this. I'm a sovereign citizen. This court has no jurisdiction over my physical person. I let out a laugh. I couldn't help it. It was a short, sharp bark of pure disbelief. A sovereign citizen, I echoed, shaking my head. Oh, we have a scholar in the room today. A legal giant. I took my glasses off and pointed them directly at him like a weapon. Mr. Thorne, I am going to make this very simple for your sovereign brain to process. You are in my courtroom. That means I have jurisdiction over everything from the hair on your head to the dirty sneakers on your feet. You have deliberately defied a direct order from the bench. You are obstructing the proceedings. Therefore, I find you in direct contempt of court. His eyes widened behind those ridiculous sunglasses. Wait, what? Bird, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scythe. Take him to the holding cell. Let him sit there. He likes sitting so much, he can sit in a concrete room until he remembers how his legs work. We will recall this case when he finds his manners. If he doesn't find them, he can spend the night. Yes, Your Honor. Bird moved with the smooth, practiced efficiency of a man who deals with idiots for a living. He opened the low wooden gate, walked right up to the defendant's table, and motioned with his hand. Let's go, sir. Thorne was paralyzed. The tough guy act shattered into a million pieces. He looked at me, then at Bird, then back at me. He was waiting for the punchline. He was waiting for me to say I was just kidding, that he had won the standoff, and that we could now proceed on his terms. He genuinely thought this was a negotiation. Moo, Ken Lambert ordered, his voice dropping an octave, a tone that left absolutely no room for interpretation. Thorne slowly uncrossed his legs. He stood up. For a second, I thought he might actually try to argue again, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but Bird just pointed a firm finger toward the side door. Thorne shuffled out, his head down, the heavy wooden door closing behind him with a resounding thud. The courtroom exhaled. It sounded like a massive tire suddenly deflating. I looked over at Mr. Pendleton. The poor man was sweating through his collar, clutching his paperwork to his chest like a life preserver in a hurricane. Mr. Pendleton, I said, softening my tone just a fraction. I don't coddle people, but I don't kick a man when he's down either. Take a breath. Relax your shoulders. You are not on trial here. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor, he stammered, frantically wiping his forehead with a crumpled tissue. I just want to get this over with. And we will, I assured him, but we are going to do it right. I have zero tolerance for people who think the rules of society do not apply to them. Mr. Thorne is about to get a crash course in reality, and unfortunately for him, I am the professor. I called a brief recess. I went back to my chambers, drank half a glass of water, and reviewed the lease agreement Pendleton had submitted. It was standard boilerplate stuff. Monthly rent of $1,200 due on the first security deposit of 1 month's rent. Tenant responsible for damages beyond normal wear and tear. According to the ledger, Thorne had stopped paying rent in March, lived there for 3 free months, and then vacated in the middle of the night in June, leaving behind a trail of destruction that looked like a rock band had used the place for target practice. 20 minutes later, Bird came into my chambers. He says he's ready to behave, Judge. Did he take the sunglasses off, I asked. Yes, ma'am. Spit the gum out, too. Good. Let's see if his brain cells have started firing again. I walked back out. The gallery stood. This time, as I took my seat, I looked over at the defendant's podium. Marcus Thorne was standing. His hands were clasped respectfully in front of him. The sunglasses were gone, revealing a pair of bloodshot, nervous eyes. He looked like a deflated balloon. The swagger had evaporated in the holding cell, replaced by the stark realization that he was not in control. Well, I said, putting my glasses back on and staring him down. Look who discovered gravity. Mr. Thorne, are we ready to participate in civil society, or do you need more time and time out to ponder your sovereignty? I'm ready, Your Honor, he mumbled, looking down at his shoes. Speak up, I barked. I don't do mumbling. If you have something to say it clearly. He lifted his chin, though he still couldn't quite meet my eyes. I am ready, Your Honor. Excellent. Now, stand up straight, keep your hands out of your pockets, and do not speak unless I ask you a direct question. Do we understand each other? Yes. Yes. What? Yes, Your Honor. That's better. Now, let's get down to the business of why you think you can live in another man's property for free. I opened the file, laying the papers out methodically. Mr. Pendleton is suing you for $5,000, $3,600 for unpaid rent, and $1,400 for property damage. According to the plaintiff, you stopped paying rent in March. Is that true? Thorne shifted his weight, tapping his thumb against his index finger. Well, Your Honor, the thing is, stop, I held up a hand, flat and unyielding. It is a yes or no question. I didn't ask for a story. I asked for a fact. Did you pay your rent in March, April, and May? No, but there is no but. You didn't pay. Why? He took a deep breath, clearly trying to rally some of his lost confidence. Because the apartment was uninhabitable, Your Honor. Mr. Pendleton refused to fix the issues, so I withheld rent. It's a tenant's right. It's constructive eviction. I raised an eyebrow. Constructive eviction. Big words. Let's see if you actually know what they mean. What exactly was uninhabitable about the apartment? The heater was broken, Thorne declared, pointing an accusatory finger at Pendleton. I was freezing, and there was mold in the bathroom. It was a health hazard. I turned to Mr. Pendleton. Mr. Pendleton, did he ever notify you about a broken heater or mold? He sent me one text message in April, Your Honor, Pendleton said, his voice shaky but gaining strength. I have it right here. He said the heater was making a funny noise. I sent a repairman over the next day. The repairman said the heater was fine, but Mr. Thorne had jammed a piece of cardboard into the vent. I looked back at Thorne. He suddenly found the ceiling tiles very interesting. A piece of cardboard, I repeated flatly. Mr. Thorne, did you shove cardboard into your heating vent? It was rattling, he muttered defensively. I was just trying to fix it. So you broke it, and then you blamed the landlord. I flipped to the next page of evidence. And what about the mold? Pendleton spoke up again, holding up a photograph. Your Honor, I inspected the bathroom after he moved out. It wasn't mold, it was dirt. He hadn't cleaned the shower in 6 months. It scrubbed right off with bleach. I stared at Thorne, letting the absolute absurdity of his defense sink into the silent room. You withheld 3 months of rent because you were too lazy to buy a sponge? Thorne's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then tried again, his voice rising in pitch as panic set in. That's his word against mine. It was black. It looked like toxic mold. I'm not a botanist, Your Honor. I couldn't know for sure. You don't need to be a botanist to identify filth, Mr. Thorne, I retorted, tapping my pen against the desk. You just need basic hygiene. You expect me to believe that you lived in a freezing apartment, breathing what you believe to be toxic mold, for 3 months without calling the health department, without calling code enforcement, without sending a certified letter to your landlord demanding repairs? He looked trapped, darting his eyes around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. I told him in person, every time I saw him. Baloney, I said, leaning back in my chair and folding my arms. That is absolute, unadulterated nonsense. You didn't pay your rent because you didn't want to pay your rent. You didn't pay because you'd rather spend your money on expensive graphic t-shirts and designer sunglasses than honor your contractual obligations. You are a grifter, Mr. Thorne. You thought you could string this man along, live rent-free, and then vanish into the night without consequence. I picked up the stack of photographs Mr. Pendleton had submitted. I flipped through them one by one, holding each up so Thorne could see the disaster he had left behind. Let's look at this uninhabitable apartment, shall we? I said, my voice dripping with disdain. Here we have a hole in the drywall the size of a bowling ball. Did the mold do that, Mr. Thorne? He swallowed hard. I slipped while moving a sofa. You slipped, I repeated dryly. And here we have a carpet completely stained with what looks like motor oil and cheap wine. Did the broken heater cause that? I had friends over, he mumbled, shrinking further into himself. And finally, the kitchen. Cabinet doors ripped off their hinges, garbage piled halfway to the ceiling, a refrigerator full of rotting food. I dropped the photos onto the bench with a heavy slap. You didn't live in an apartment, Mr. Thorne. You lived in a pigsty of your own making, and now you have the audacity to stand in my courtroom after trying to play the tough guy rebel and claim you are the victim? He tried one last desperate maneuver. He kept my security deposit. That was $1,200. That should cover the damages. Oh, it covers part of it, I agreed, doing the math on my legal pad. Let's break it down, since you seem to struggle with basic arithmetic. You owe $3,600 for unpaid rent. The damages supported by Mr. Pendleton's receipts here for drywall repair, professional carpet replacement, and deep cleaning come to $2,600. That is a total of $6,200. Subtract your $1,200 deposit, and you still owe this man exactly $5,000. I looked up, making direct eye contact with him, which conveniently is the jurisdictional limit of this court. Thorne looked like he was going to be sick. The arrogant sovereign citizen from 20 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a sullen man-child realizing the bill had finally come due. You don't get to skate through life expecting other people to subsidize your existence, I told him, my tone shifting from angry to a cold, hard finality. Mr. Pendleton is not your father. He is not your bank. He is a man trying to run a business. And you tried to ruin him because you have no sense of responsibility. I turned my attention back to the plaintiff. Pendleton was standing taller now, the nervous sweat drying, a look of profound relief washing over his tired face. Mr. Pendleton, I said clearly, you kept meticulous records. You followed the law. You did everything right except trusting this young man in the first place. Thank you, Your Honor, Pendleton said, his voice thick with emotion. I just didn't know what else to do. You did the right thing by bringing him here, I assured him. I looked back at Thorne one last time. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000. And Mr. Thorne, next time you are summoned to a court, I suggest you stand up immediately. It might save you from looking like a complete fool. We're done here. I slammed the gavel down. Bang. Parties are excused, Bird announced. I stood up, gathered my files, and walked off the bench, not looking back as I headed toward my chambers. The case was closed. The truth had won. And Marcus Thorne had learned a $5,000 lesson about respect, reality, and what happens when you try to play games in my courtroom. There are days when this job tests my patience to its absolute limit, days when the sheer volume of human entitlement makes me want to scream, but then there are moments like this, moments where the bully gets put in his place, where the hard-working man gets his due, and where the rules of civilized society are upheld. That is why I do this. That is why I put on the robe every single day. Justice isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it requires a trip to a holding cell, and sometimes it involves forcing a grown man to realize he isn't the center of the universe. But it is always undeniably fair.